Welcome to Golf and the Good Life, your guide to golf travel across the pond. I'm DJ Jones. He is Connor Evers. And today marks episode 40 of our little podcast, which feels like a good time to pause and say thanks to everyone out there who's listened and provided a little support, sent their questions and what have you. We always appreciate it. We have no intention of letting up anytime soon on this, but Connor, we've even had some listeners begin their journey with H&B right here with the podcast, which is really great.
Yeah, I was actually just talking to someone over email a couple days ago, and they just put a regular inquiry in, but at the bottom of the email, when they were chatting about the trip and what they were looking at, they're like, "Hey, my group and I that we're potentially traveling with, we've been listening to the podcast." He's like, I listen to usually an episode in the car every day. I don't think I've actually mentioned that to you, Deej, yet, but pretty cool. I don't think we realize how big it is. That sounds weird, but of how much it's grown and the amount of listening that we do. And it's a passion project, that's for sure. But appreciate, as DJ said, everyone listening, and excited for today's episode and more to come in the future.
You're right. It is kind of hard to believe that folks just want to sit down and listen to us talk. I mean, but here we are, and it's working out so far, so good there. But we're coming off of a pretty busy time from a inquiry standpoint, like Connor was saying. The Open Championship always leads to that. We're over the halfway point in the 2024 travel season. What's the latest up there at H&B HQ?
All good, Deej. Yeah, past the halfway point, and we are now in August. Can't believe how quick the summer has gone, and we're now looking and booking some reservations and stuff for dining and touring for groups in September, and then about to be October. So our final groups to travel, which is just absolutely bonkers to think about, but all good. And I also want to do a quick shout out, like I have recently been doing, as some of my groups have recently returned from expeditions across the pond. Members from Stonewall Golf Links was a group a few months ago that traveled for them as well. Tamarack Golf Club, Loma Santa Fe Country Club, and Emerald Bay Club as well. Those are just a few of many. But shout out to those specific groups that have returned back. Weather's been pretty decent. I know I have a couple groups leaving this week that are Ireland. It looks pretty wet on the forecast, but other than that, all good here at HQ Deej, and just looking forward to our last groups traveling in the 2024 season.
Awesome stuff. And yet it's been great to see, the field reports rolling in on social media. Our friends at St. Andrews Executive Travel, they posted a photo just this morning on Instagram. One of our groups that pulling up to their private jet for their ride home must have had a great week, and certainly the only way to fly, no pun intended. Mm-hmm. But shifting back to today's episode, the topic might feel, I want to say, a little unorthodox given what we do for a living, but what we're tackling today is the question, do I really need a golf travel company? Or as others in the business might call themselves, a golf tour operator. Right up front, I'm going to say that this is not going to be some 30-minute sales pitch on using, a professional to book your trip. Because if there's anything that we have, said from the very beginning, it's that, our goal here is to simply be a tool and a resource for all golf travelers heading overseas, whether you ever have any intention of traveling with H&B or not. And this will be no exception. But the thing is, the internet, it's kind of leveled the playing field. It's made travel planning more accessible for all of us. And so early on, Connor, from a planning perspective, you're probably getting asked, can I just do this on my own? And what I think a lot of folks will come away from this episode instead thinking is not, can I do it on my own, but do I really want to?
Yeah, and it's a good point, and a question that comes up a lot. And maybe the group, when I first had the conversation, maybe the question isn't asked directly, but it's asked indirectly, or it's what they're definitely thinking. Like I said, it's one of those first things that come up, and it's even before we talk about the nuts and bolts of the trip of where we're going, when we're going, how many people are in the group, and they want to know, do I really need you? And I think the big thing is just them understanding, outside of the golf and the touring and all those things, what value does the operator bring to me? What am I looking? What's that big dream or vision or pipe dream of the trip? And seeing what those different facets of what the operator brings, and see if those kind of things will lead to, adding value to their trip. There are many scenarios where you simply just don't need a golf tour operator, but just as many as where you do. And we'll get into those of, tee times and such, kind of, again, learning and seeing what the vision of the group is for this trip, and seeing how that will work with a tour operator, and seeing just kind of both visions align.
Well, that's a great way of looking at it. I mean, it does all come down in the end to education, being armed with the best information, and then making a decision whether it's needed or not. The fact is, like you said, you don't always need a golf travel company. There are some very key situations where that's going to be the case, and so I'm just going to start with a few of those. And the first and foremost, and the one that we hear perhaps most commonly, is you're looking for essentially just a tee time or only tee times as part of your trip. Maybe you've booked your accommodations and you're going to rent a car and you need help with the tee times. Or the one that happens more commonly is you've booked all your other tee times and you need one. In this case, the old course at St. Andrews, or maybe it's Muirfield or whatever. You're missing that one crucial piece. Totally get it. But the thing is, golf travel companies, we're pretty much universally working in terms of hotel, golf, transportation, other arrangements within your trip. And straight up, if you've booked, the majority of those components, you've kind of cut out all of the incentive for, someone in our business, to essentially work with you from there. So you're probably going to be hard pressed to find someone that's willing to help when you're talking about just tee times. We're knockoff now. That's not what we do, but like I said, the internet has leveled the playing field. If you're out there and you need one, reach out to the club. Look on their website or whatever. It is possible, but in terms of getting a pro to help you with it, it's probably not something they're going to tackle. Another common one is if you're traveling solo. We talked quite a bit about this during our episode on small groups. Connor kind of laid out in pretty good detail why H&B and probably other companies don't really work with single golfers. And in this case, a lot of the marquee places simply don't book tee times for solo golfers, at least in advance. You might be able to score something at the last minute or what have you. And so as a result, at least in our case, and probably for many others, you're going to want to have a minimum of 2 golfers. If you're traveling solo, it's a case where you probably just don't need it, and you need to, sort of set out on your own in the planning process, but use that flexibility to your advantage. You're not working around any other opinions or, who wants to play where. Chart your own course, find an accommodation and sort of fill in the golf where you can. We talked about St. Andrews. If you're hoping to play the old course, set yourself there for the whole week, enter that singles daily draw every day. And then if you don't hit, fill it in as you go. But it can definitely be an advantage. You don't need to lock yourself into some prearranged itinerary that might miss some key courses that you want to play because they can't be booked. And instead, embrace that flexibility and use it to your advantage in the end.
Fantastic points, Siege, and you're definitely right with that. And as you mentioned, we have a great podcast. I think it was the last couple that we did on just single golfers, and so definitely listen to that if you're considering it. But still, kind of continuing on at the same point of reasons why you may not need a golf tour operator. And the next kind of point I would say is short trips or add-on trips. And when I say short, I mean a lot of tour operators have minimum length stay. So, for example, if you're going over and say you're doing a full touring trip and you want to play, a round or two, a lot of times it just doesn't make sense for tour operators to book that kind of trip in. And it goes back to just, like I said, just booking a couple times in. Perfect example. We got a call in, it was a couple weeks ago, from a gentleman that was coming back from a cruise. Their layover was for some reason it was in Edinburgh, but they were going on a cruise. Like I said, layover was in Edinburgh, and they wanted to just do 2 days of golf and a little bit of touring with the wives. And we went through the process, and it just didn't make sense for us to do it. Again, we have overhead costs, and operators have overhead costs. And a lot of times it just simply does not make sense from honestly, just a pricing standpoint, because a 2-day trip can be quite expensive when you look at all these things more than likely just book that on your own for, a couple tea times or a couple days here and there. And I would say the other point would be, booking a trip that's more on a budget. As DJ mentioned, those three main factors need to be included: your golf, transportation, and lodging, for it to make sense for us, and honestly, to make sense for you. There's other things that can derail the full experience if you don't have one of those main factors included. And when folks are saying, like we said, oh, we just want tea times, or we want a roof over our head for lodging, quote unquote. It's just not simply what we do and what a lot of operators do as well. It's kind of the full gambit, full package, and want the experience to be great on and off the golf course, even from dining and touring and etc. And obviously we're business, and you're going to pay a little more to have us build the itinerary for you. And that premium adds value to the trip, like we mentioned. And a lot of times, if you're only looking for a few things, or a quick trip, or limited lodging, or just not 2-3 star lodging, something of the sorts, honestly, it just comes down to, you may as well just book on your own. And a lot of things too we'll get is, hey, can we do all this, but do you do Airbnbs, or us book Airbnbs? Just simply just don't do that as well. So like I said, if you're looking for a budget trip, us as well as some other operators just may not be the right fit, and really comes down to just potentially just booking out on your own.
Yeah, it's always that relationship between price and value, right? If you're someone that we wants wall-to-wall golf and a bed and breakfast and just needs, a rental car or whatever, that's a very different proposition than someone who's looking for, the service and the care that goes into an H&B expedition, as an example, where you've got a driver host, and you've got, obviously rooms at, higher end hotels, and, the restaurants have all been individually, vetted, and you've got your reservations for those. Those are just two very different things, but it really comes down to, what do you value
Mhm.
as the traveler? Price point aside, that's really what's going to drive it in the end. Well, those are just a handful of the examples, I should say, of why it doesn't always make sense to engage with a golf travel company, but there's just as many reasons to engage. And I know we said this wasn't going to be a pitch, but listen, there are some very key reasons that should be covered. As you're trying to decide which route to go, there can be some pretty big ones mixed in here, Connor.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the big one of kind of starting off of why you would, use the services of a golf tour operator, and the big one that a lot of us get in the industry, is Old Course St. Andrews tee times. I mean, really the only way to guarantee it outside of using the advanced application, which will open up this month to apply directly through the Links Trust, but is to get a commercial guaranteed time through a tour operator. That's why, honestly, a lot of groups come to us, is just to get that big piece of the puzzle out of the way and to confirm it. That happens a lot of times with a lot of first time, groups that are going over and wanting to play the Old Course of St. Andrews, which we get. But really, to only have that time and to book it in advance. And we've talked about the booking process as well as, when you're able to book that so far in advance, you're able to get those other tee times in advance. So that's kind of just the big one bullet point just in that alone. And the other way is like first time trips. I mean, like I said, sometimes this has been a complete dream. And I'm just not even talking about St. Andrews. I'm just talking about it, expedition in general. Is, people have this dream of going over, and they, come to us, and they're, like I said, kind of that first point, seeing if they should do this on their own, or, what have you. We're having the conversation, and we're kind of laying it out, all these different facets. And say if it's a group of 8 or 12, they're like, oh my gosh, I did not realize all the work this is going to have to take. And I would say also, if you're a group captain, or just say a leader of the trip, you have a lot of like expectations rising on you of like, hey, this has got to be good. And a lot of times it's just like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. This is too stressful. Hey, give it to, an expert, and, get that burden off your shoulders. And, like I said, a lot of people will come to us and say, hey, we want to play all these courses on the map, and go through, all of Scotland or all of Ireland, and want to play Muirfield on a Wednesday or something. And they just have no clue that it's only Tuesdays and Thursdays. And that's just one example of many that goes through that process. So yeah, it's just someone to kind of help, align yourself, get those goals in check, and, have a great trip.
That is a really great point about, if you're the group captain, especially, the expectations that go with that. I mean, if you're going over with 7 other buddies, and things go sideways, they may not ever say it out loud, but in the back of their
Oh
mind,
yeah.
it's you that's getting pinned the blame. And do you
Mhm.
really want to take that on? But the biggie, I think, is the complexity of the trips, like you kind of touched on there. Going to Streamsong and going to St. Andrews are two very different things. One, you can fire up the laptop and have it done in about 4 minutes if you wanted. The other has so many other things involved, and as that complexity goes up, so too does your need for an expert. Because for the example I would give is, we've had many groups this year that have done Old Course at St. Andrews, Muirfield, Royal County Down, and Royal Port Rush. There are so many chips that have to fall your
Mhm.
way to get that to come together. It makes me nervous just thinking about it. But Connor and Chris and Mike, they know what they're doing. They pull it off. I don't get in the way of it, but at the same time, it's like, wow, that's a lot. And yet they managed to do it. And so, like I said, as that complexity goes up, so too does the need for it. The other is your time. We touched earlier on the budget aspect, and no, a golf travel company versus doing it yourself, it's never going to be in the same ballpark price point wise. That's just the fact of the matter. But if you were to, add in the value of your time to that, that gap narrows considerably, if not turns the other way around. And I get it. I mean, the internet, like we said in the beginning, it's turned us all into amateur travel planners. There is nothing I love more than sitting down and planning out an entire trip. But I mean, we're talking for something like this where you've got 8 other people or 7 other people and all of these different stops. I mean, you've got spreadsheets and iCal reminders and group chats and email chains and confirmations and payments and who's paid what. And oh, by the way, John doesn't want to play here. He thinks we should go there instead. And well, now you've got to navigate that. I don't have time for that. And if you do, more power to you. Go for it. It can be done. I don't know anybody that has that much time left over to devote to it. But really, all of these examples in terms of why you should consider working with a golf travel company, in the end, it could all be wrapped up into essentially one item. And that's just that we kind of do it better. And the example that I would give, or the analogy, is you might give me the exact same ingredients and the exact same cookware and maybe a professional kitchen as 11 Madison Park or the French Laundry or Alenia. But what I don't have is 3 Michelin stars. And the idea that I would somehow be able to take those same things and piece together something of equal experience or value as a dish at one of those restaurants is absolutely silly. Golf travel is no different. At least overseas golf travel is no different. This is an experience driven world, and oftentimes it comes down to what you can't see on paper. The courses and the hotels and so forth might look the same, but what's missed is the multi-decade relationship that the golf travel company has with all of the hotels and golf courses and transportation providers. It's the knowledge of, Muirfield doesn't take visitors on Wednesdays, as Connor said. It's all of those wrinkles and roadblocks and so forth that you are encountering in the planning process or even during the trip that are kind of a big deal if you're taking it on by yourself. It's all things we've heard and seen so many times before. And all of that stuff gets deposited into your overall experience, and you can't see that value on paper. I think the example and I'm gonna cite is a recent survey we just got back from somebody from Gulf Mills Golf Club, and the note was what essentially drove their satisfaction was the overall golf experience and the clear indication that H&B has a wonderful reputation with the hotels, restaurants, and golf courses. Made the trip truly spectacular. None of that shows up on paper. And so when it comes down to that question, it all goes back to, can you do it? Absolutely. Do you want to? That's up to you.
It's so true. And my colleague Chris McCon actually just celebrating 25 years with HMV, which is pretty unique. And we had a gentleman call in and we were kind of talking about the same topic of this podcast. And it was, hey, what value do you bring to me? What value do you bring to the group? And he just kind of candidly was just like, do I need to book with you? And I was talking to Chris about this, and he's like, Connor, the good way of saying it is like, hey, you can write your own will, but maybe you should give it to a lawyer and have them, write it off and do that. I was like, it's a good point. Maybe not a direct analogy of a golf trip to Scotland, but you get my point and Chris's point. So that's what I would add there to the final thoughts of the podcast. This is great, Deej. Really appreciate it, and I think this will add a lot of value to a lot of our listeners.
Yeah, I hope so too. And that very first question that you're getting, Connor, of "Do I really need you?" Maybe this has shed a little light for some folks. As always, if we missed anything along the way, or if you've still got questions on this topic, send us an email, goff@haversham.com, or you can DM us anytime on social media. But otherwise, we will be back again soon with another episode 41, I guess it will be. But until then, we wish you plenty of golf at its finest and life at its best.